That's the direction that all this is going, which is really exciting. In terms of the players, I think it really spans the spectrum within transportation and technology. You've got large OEM companies that are looking at this, whether it's companies like Ford or Volvo Cars or Volkswagen of America. You've got technology companies like Waymo. You've got other companies that are subsidiaries of larger car companies like Cruise. You've got companies like Motional that are associated with OEMs like Honda. I think that's really a strength of the ecosystem in that you have a lot of significant players that believe this is the future of transportation, that it's going to bring tremendous benefits to society.
Hello and welcome again to another episode of Sacktown Talks. Today we're glad to be joined by Jeff Farah from the Autonomous Vehicle Industry Association. Jeff, thanks for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, no worries. Autonomous vehicles has been, I guess, the talk of society, the past couple years. It all started kind of with Tesla Autopilot. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the association, how it got started?
I'd be glad to. I think you hit the nail on the head, which is for many years, people were talking about the promise of autonomous vehicles. And I think for a lot of people, it sounded like it was kind of a science experiment. But the great news is they're here today. And you certainly see deployments that are taking place all across the United States. And that's whether it's the case in passenger cars, and you're seeing that in places like San Francisco and Los Angeles. You're seeing it in autonomous trucks. You're seeing it with shuttles. You're seeing it with zero occupancy delivery vehicles. And so it's really exciting because we see tremendous safety and accessibility and supply chain benefits for all of us. And so our industry association represents all the major players in the US autonomous vehicle market and all those different vehicle modes that I just mentioned.
Yeah, so I guess transportation regulation, I'm sure is always something that's difficult to deal with, especially here in the United States. Kind of, who are the players in this space, and kind of what's regulation look like today?
Sure. So the interesting thing about this space is that there's obviously a very strong federal government component, but there's also a very strong state government component. And you have the federal government through the Department of Transportation that is doing things like regulating the design and the performance of the vehicles. You have states that have really expertise in areas around insurance and liability and providing licenses to drivers and whatnot. And so for the autonomous vehicle industry, we have to play in both of those ballparks. And so have a very strong process for engaging at both state levels and also federal levels. And then obviously now you have a lot of cities that are very interested in realizing the benefits of autonomous vehicles. And so they're figuring out ways that they can get these deployed in their neck of the woods.
And kind of, I think we're aware, Tesla's been working on autopilot. Here in California, we've seen Cruise, Waymo. It's been doing testing, but you also hear about Google, Apple, kind of playing this space. Kind of who's developing systems now, and kind of who's on the streets today.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would just note is there's a big distinction between what we refer to as driver assist technology versus autonomous vehicles. And you look at something like Tesla Autopilot, that's a very distinct technology from what our members are focused on, because in those situations, the driver might be able to take his or her hands off the wheel for some period of time, but they're still involved in the driving task. But when you think about a company like Cruise or Waymo that you mentioned, or many of our other members, insofar as there's a human in the vehicle, they are not responsible for the driving task at all. This is something where you have companies now that are deploying completely driverlessly. And so that's the direction that all this is going, which is really exciting. In terms of the players, I think it really spans the spectrum within transportation and technology. You've got large OEM companies that are looking at this, whether it's companies like Ford or Volvo Cars or Volkswagen of America. You've got technology companies like Waymo. You've got other companies that are subsidiaries of larger car companies like Cruise. You've got companies like Motional that are associated with OEMs like Hyundai. And so the list really goes on and on, but I think that's really a strength of the ecosystem in that you have a lot of significant players that believe this is the future of transportation, that it's going to bring tremendous benefits to society. And so that really powers our organization, and it really gives us a lot of enthusiasm for the work.
Yeah, this is kind of something you just touched on. I guess for our listeners who don't know, I guess there's different levels of autonomous driving. Can you kind of explain that? I guess, what is there, 4 or 5 levels?
Yeah, so the Society of Automotive Engineers has designated levels 0 through 5, and you kind of think of zero. This is no technology whatsoever, very beginnings of vehicles, and this is something that perhaps a lot of cars on the road today have surpassed this. Level 5 means that this is a completely autonomous vehicle; it can go anywhere, anytime. And so right now, where the technology is in level 4, and people are seeing level 4 autonomous driving systems being deployed, and so if listeners have been in Los Angeles or in San Francisco and seen vehicles going around those cities autonomously, those are level 4 vehicles. An important distinction with a level 4 vehicle versus a level 5 vehicle is they still can go really incredible spots. And you think about things like autonomous trucking. The limitation might be a highway stretch that's perhaps hundreds of miles long, but there's a designated mapped area that the vehicles are restricted to. And the vehicles also restrict themselves in other areas. So, for example, if there are certain weather conditions that the vehicle is not able to be in, then it will restrict itself in that way as well. And so the future is interesting in terms of where this goes from here. We believe that there's a tremendous amount of progress that can be made within level 4 autonomy. And so that's the focus of our organization. And we leave some of the other levels of autonomy around lane keep assistance at levels 2 and 3 and other types of driver assist features to other folks.
Kind of, as this has all kind of come on so fast, and it kind of seems a lot of this autonomous driving has come hand in hand with kind of electric vehicles. Kind of, what are some of the challenges you guys are facing? Kind of, implementing this technology in different states.
Yeah, it's interesting, as I'm sure to a lot of people, this feels like an overnight success, but the reality is that this has been something that's been tested on public roadways for more than a decade. And we recently released information at Avia that showed that just within our membership, they have driven more than 44 million autonomous miles in the United States. That's the equivalent to about 180 trips to the moon, more than 1,750 trips across the country completely autonomously. So that gives a little bit of a sense of the scope in terms of how much autonomous driving has really gone on. These are very, very significant technological breakthroughs that take a while to get to the level of sophistication that we are at. And so I think that in the coming years, you will have the American public consciousness really be increasing here quite substantially because our members are deploying in new regions all across the country. And so people will begin to see these, again, whether they're shuttles in senior communities or college campuses, or they're zero occupancy delivery vehicles delivering groceries to people in a safer and easier way, or they're in robo taxis moving people around city centers. This is all going to be unfolding across the country, and it's a very exciting time for the industry.
Yeah, so I guess kind of what's kind of the roadmap going forward? How do you see this, being used in real life applications the next, I guess, 10 years?
A lot of companies are approaching this differently. I think the one thing that our members have in common is that they are all focused on building autonomous driving systems, and we're agnostic in terms of what the vehicle type is and what the application is. And you're at a moment now where you see companies that are experimenting with a lot of different things. Some of them are focused on goods delivery, and they think that there's a better way to get products to your stores or to get things to your front doorstep. Others are focused on movement of people. And so I think that's a lot of what's unfolded in, again, places like San Francisco and Los Angeles, where you have these fleets that are really like robo taxis that are moving people mostly around city centers at this point. And so the list goes on and on. I think that this is the fun time of the deployments where we really get to see what it is that's happening and see people really experiment.
Yeah. Kind of, we talked about the different levels, but kind of what are the current safety standards and regulations for autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, this is something where again there's a federal component to this as well as a state component, and the federal government really has expertise over the performance and design of the vehicle. I think one thing to appreciate is that as we think about autonomous vehicles, right now we have very human-centric vehicles where the car that you and I drive, it's got a steering wheel and brake pedals and rearview mirrors and all these things that are really designed to help you or I think about how it is we get from point A to point B. But if you have an autonomous driving system eventually where you're nothing more than a passenger sitting in the back seat, then you'd probably design the vehicle in a very different way. And so we refer to those in the industry as novel design vehicles. And this is something where NHTSA, which is a sub-agency of the Department of Transportation, they have a lot of expertise in this area, and they are certainly regulating that space. FMCSA is the sub-agency within the Department of Transportation, which has some expertise over the trucking sector, and certainly they're very actively involved in terms of the regulation of those vehicles. At the same time, though, this is something where the states, they have a lot to say over what's happening on their roads. And so you have 23 states now that have authorized autonomous vehicles via legislation to be on their roads. And in those situations, in many of those situations, there are safety requirements that go along with it. The vehicle has to be able to obey all traffic laws. The companies have to be able to engage in a law enforcement interaction plan to make sure they can engage with local law enforcement. And then a really neat feature of autonomous vehicles, which is also a safety benefit, is the vehicles have to be able to achieve what we refer to as a minimal risk condition, which essentially means if something goes wrong, the vehicle can take itself out of commission and pull itself off to the side of the road so that it can be dealt with. And so this is something where it's an incredible safety feature. And sometimes I think to myself that I wish humans had that ability, because I think people oftentimes are guilty of doing things like driving when they've had too much to drink, or driving tired or recklessly, or distracted with texting and whatnot. So safety is really at the core of the industry. And certainly we have a lot of oversight from the federal and state level, but we appreciate that this is an important role that we have to engage in.
Yeah, it's always interesting. We always go over studies about, what's killing people. And it's always number one is always vehicles, right? Vehicle accidents, traffic deaths. Kind of, what is the safety of kind of this technology, and how can it help, I guess, prevent vehicle deaths in the future?
You've hit on a really unfortunate thing, which is last year we lost more than 43,000 people on American roads. And in California, it was more than 5,000 individuals alone. And so this is something where that safety record is unacceptable. And technology can make us safer. Technology has improved so many aspects of our lives. And I think what Secretary Buttigieg of the Department of Transportation has said is that we're almost like people living in a war zone, where we've come to accept this carnage. Like, this is just the price of moving in society. But it doesn't need to be that way at all. We can ultimately have technology lead us to a safer way. And so that safety record is really what drives a lot of people to want to work in the autonomous vehicle industry and make these vehicles as effective as they are. I think that, as we've talked about, autonomous vehicles, they don't drive drunk, they don't text while driving, they don't drive impaired, they don't drive distracted. These are machines that have a 360-degree visibility of all the circumstances around them. They're able to respond much, much quicker than humans are able to do. And so this is something where we're already seeing this make roads safer. Some of our members that have been driving millions of miles have released data to show that not only is there future capability in terms of avoiding collisions, there's also current safety that is being deployed and allowing the streets of a place like San Francisco to be much safer. So this is something that we're quite proud of, and it really is a shining example of what's possible with autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, it's kind of just something, someone as myself who has, a Tesla, who has, full self-driving and have invested in this, kind of looked at it a bit. I know there, the different systems, and it's level 3, level 4. But, the one thing that kind of you always see on the forums and the chats is like the technology changing, and how, is it a camera based? Is it radar based? Is it LiDAR based? Kind of what are these successful level 4 systems using? And is it kind of a basket of technologies, or is it just one thing that they're relying on?
I think a basket is a great way to describe it. And as I said earlier, you think about our members, they are all fundamentally designing autonomous driving systems. And that's a hardware and software stack that's coming together to make the magic, right? To make it drive by itself. And you look at that, and what the ultimate vehicle is doing is it's using LiDAR, which is laser, and it's trying to gauge distance. It's using radar, it's using camera, it's using artificial intelligence, and all this is coming together to form the autonomous driving system, which I think of as the brains behind the vehicle. This is the thing that ultimately makes it work. And so you're seeing a lot of significant advancements in each of those subcomponents. And you look at an area like LiDAR, and this is helping us to be able to have greater visibility and judging of distances. That's especially useful in areas like autonomous trucking, where you want to be able to look far down the road to make sure that you're able to avoid a lot of these situations. I think what's really important here to underscore is that you just have such a better ability to be able to avoid incidents with autonomous vehicles than humans do. And I've been a passenger in many autonomous vehicles at this point, and I'm always struck by how many things I would never have noticed or avoided as a human that the autonomous vehicle is looking at. The other thing that's also really striking is that when you have a situation where there's a problematic intersection, say in a community, if you see that, you might tell your neighbor, you might tell your friends, hey, you should avoid that intersection. There's a lot of collisions there, or people are, pulling out behind bushes and whatnot. With autonomous vehicles, what they're able to do is they get that information about problematic areas. They deploy those learnings to the entire fleet of vehicles. And so at scale, you're able to make all the vehicles in the fleet smarter. We're not able to do that as humans. And so that's something where, again, this really underscores the safety imperative.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. We've just had this explosion of talk about artificial intelligence in the last 6 months with, Chat GPT and all this stuff. But this is something that I guess you guys have been using for a while in automotive autonomous vehicles. Kind of what has this advance in AI kind of help kind of bring forward, autonomous vehicles?
Well, certainly, artificial intelligence is an important piece of this, and I think this is something that a lot of Americans have gotten to know AI through Chat GPT or whatever it is that they're using in that regard. And our industry's obviously been using this for quite a while, and it's inherent in what we do. And certainly, advancements in AI and in computing in general are really helping to move all this forward. I think that the conversation about AI in America has been a really interesting one, and I think that a lot of times people are focused on some of the concerns about what this might mean for various professions and various walks of life. We're hopeful that people in the context of autonomous vehicles will look at AI as being something that's really a demonstrated benefit. This is something where AI in this way is going to make roads safer. It's going to allow people with physical limitations to be able to have access to transportation that they've never had before. It's going to ease a lot of the supply chain challenges that certainly states like California have suffered from. And so we're obviously very, very hopeful in this regard and want to make sure that we're seen as an example of really what AI is capable of.
It's interesting. We've done a couple of shows on technology recently, and we've kind of come to learn that I guess the U.S. in terms of regulating technology is more hands off than other countries, which some people have argued that allowed our technology companies to flourish more than other spots. Kind of here we have an interesting juncture, right, where we have technology companies who are kind of loosely regulated in the U.S., and then we have transportation, which is highly regulated. Kind of what's your feeling on the need for regulation in this space and kind of advancing technology, yet keeping people safe?
Well, certainly in the case of autonomous vehicles, this is something where we are asking for regulation. We are asking for legislation. There are certain unanswered questions, especially at the federal government level, that we think need to be answered. And this would make it so that ultimately our members can be able to get out there and deploy and have the confidence to understand what the regulatory landscape is. As I think a lot of your listeners can appreciate, a lot of times that uncertainty and silence can be very harmful. And so we've certainly been very forceful in asking for that regulation and for that legislation. I think that's also true at the state level, where I think sometimes there is a little bit of silence in terms of what's permissible on the roads. And we certainly want to make sure that the states are embracing autonomous vehicles. I think, relative to artificial intelligence, generally speaking, there's a robust discussion going on in Washington, D.C. right now about artificial intelligence and, what needs to take place. And there's not a one bill per se that's moving through Congress, but certainly some of the leading policymakers have proposed some pillars and considerations that might be included. That's something that we'll no doubt be a part of. And again, we hope that within the context of AI regulation, people will look at autonomous vehicles and really see what the opportunity is.
And I guess here and specifically in California, kind of what needed regulations do we need here to kind of foster and advance this technology?
In California, you've got an interesting setup where certainly the state through the Department of Motor Vehicles and the California Highway Patrol has a lot to say about autonomous vehicles. At the same time, the California Public Utilities Commission is in the position of needing to issue permits to allow a couple of our members, Cruise and Waymo, to be able to further deploy within the city of San Francisco. And so that unfortunately has been delayed a couple of times here, and it threatens to become a more politicized process, which has really been unfortunate. So we're hopeful that the CPUC will take action soon on these couple of permits, because I think what we're seeing here is that those two companies in particular have been deploying throughout the city of San Francisco, and again, opening up accessibility opportunities that previously have not been available. And so that's been something that's been very exciting, but they're being limited in terms of what they can do. And we need CPUC to step in and ultimately do that. And so that's something that we see that is an ongoing conversation, and certainly one that's been frustrating to us, but hopefully soon that'll change.
It's kind of interesting. We hear a lot about, Elon Musk and his claims of, robo taxis and things like that. Kind of how far is Tesla from implementing a robo taxi and kind of validating his claims?
I'll leave it to Tesla to kind of comment on what they're doing. They're not a member of our organization. They're using a different type of technology with really driver assist technology. And so we're focused squarely on level 4 and level 5. But our members are doing extraordinary work where they're, again, deploying in a couple of cities in the state of California. There's also a lot of deployments in Nevada, Arizona, Texas, Tennessee, Michigan. The list goes on and on. And so we're at this moment now where these deployments are going to continue to unfold. And I think that a lot of Americans are going to get the opportunity to, number one, be passengers in these vehicles, but also in the case of situations where they're doing goods delivery or doing freight hauling, to be the beneficiary in that way. And so this is something where, my theory is that public consciousness around autonomous vehicles is going to dramatically uptick here in the next couple of years. And so we're very excited to be involved at this important juncture.
Yeah. So if here in California, if we wanted to check out an autonomous vehicle, kind of where could we go and kind of get a ride in one?
So right now, the main spot is in San Francisco. I think in Los Angeles, it's slightly behind, but in San Francisco, you've got companies that are testing there. You've also got companies that are already deployed in the case of Cruise and Waymo. And so, this is something where I was there recently in San Francisco. I was able to be a passenger. And it's really amazing. You think about an area like San Francisco, and it's got to be one of the hardest places in the United States to drive. You've got all these hills. You've got a huge amount of human foot traffic that's going on. You've got the fog component, the rain component. And these companies have chosen to go to this very difficult spot because they believe that they can prove out the technology there, that they can take it anywhere. And so every time I get in one of these autonomous vehicles, I'm so struck by what a conservative driver it is, how it's able to see things that I'm just not able to see. And hopefully many other Americans will get that chance soon.
So I guess if you wanted to hail one of these autonomous vehicles, is there like an app you have to log into? How do you tell it where to go, or how do you kind of stop it to get into it?
So I think different companies are doing it differently. I think in some of them they've allowed for certain members of the public a limited amount to be able to take these rides, and so they're trying to roll them out. And so it's not a full-fledged opportunity quite yet where you can hop on a Uber or Lyft app and hail an autonomous vehicle, but hopefully one day we'll get there, and it might be through companies like Uber and Lyft. It might be directly through the company that's deploying the autonomous vehicle itself. And we're early days in terms of the deployment of this, and I think we'll ultimately see a lot of business models that'll shift back and forth, and eventually we'll get to a sweet spot where people can really benefit from all this.
Yeah, we've talked about how it could help safety-wise and help people who are impaired or sleepy kind of get around. But kind of what are some of the other positives? Like just kind of thinking off the top of my head, if, parking opening up, will there be less traffic, et cetera? Kind of what are some of the benefits of autonomous vehicles that we haven't discussed yet?
I think a big one that I would really focus on is around the supply chain crisis. And that's something that California, has unfortunately suffered from. And I think a lot of the historical leadership that's come out of the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach, near where I grew up, that's been something where a lot of that's unfortunately shifted, towards the east, as there's been a lot of challenges out there. One of the things that we're very mindful of is that there's a truck driver shortage in this country of about 80,000 truck drivers, and that's supposed to double by 2031. And so we have a tremendous hole to dig ourselves out of as it relates to truck driving. And we rely upon trucks to be able to move goods throughout the country, whether they're coming out of those ports or they're moving up and down I-5 or whatever the case may be. And so autonomous trucking is really a bright spot of autonomy. This is something where we think there is an acute issue that we can really address, and this is something where the same safety benefits that come over from, say, the passenger car side or in the shuttle side, these also translate over into trucking, because the reality is that things like long haul trucking, this is a very dangerous job. There's a lot of really horrible accidents. There's certainly, I think some studies have shown that 1 in 3 truck drivers will have a very serious crash at some point in their career. And so we're really trying to address a lot of that and make sure that we can help with a lot of the supply chain crisis.
Yeah, kind of with discussions around cybersecurity becoming more of a threat. Kind of, what is the danger of cybersecurity to autonomous vehicles?
So it's interesting because all the same issues around connected vehicles and connected devices now, these really apply to autonomous vehicles as well. And so a lot of information, a lot of sustained efforts go into making sure that these are treated appropriately, and the cybersecurity standards are certainly incredible within the industry. And so that's something we take seriously. I think that one thing that's important to understand is that these vehicles are not connected in the way you might have a appliance in your home that's connected to your local Wi-Fi or something like that. That's not the way it works. All the technology that is needed to sustain and move the vehicle is all housed on top of the vehicle, and so that's something that's, I think, helpful from that perspective. But I know that from talking to a lot of industry representatives within our association, cybersecurity is something they take very seriously. They realize that that's something that people are going to rightfully ask questions about, and so we're very focused on protecting the vehicles.
Yeah. Obviously over there in Washington, D.C., I'm sure you talk to a lot of politicians and regulators about this industry. Kind of what are some of their main concerns or hesitancies about autonomous vehicles?
A big issue that we're confronting right now is around global competitiveness and what the United States' role is going to be in autonomous vehicles. And certainly in that context, the strategic competition with China is one that comes about quite frequently. There's a lot of focus on that, especially up on Capitol Hill. And the reason that's important to autonomous vehicles is that as much as the United States is the leader in terms of autonomous vehicles, in terms of deployments, in terms of investment and whatnot, the reality is that we're not the only country in the world that is creating autonomous vehicles. And there are many other countries that realize this is the future of transportation, and they want to have this type of industry in their country to bring all the benefits that we've discussed. The nearest term competitor to the United States is China, and they are certainly the ones where they are pretty close behind us in terms of their level of technological development. What's interesting, though, is that their government is extremely supportive of autonomous vehicles. They have identified this on a short list of technologies that they want to lead on in this century, and they are deploying capital. They are making sure that the regulatory atmosphere is very favorable. And so we try and make sure that policymakers really understand that challenge, and that this other government that is supporting it so much is our nearest competitor. This does not mean by any stretch of the imagination that the US government needs to support AVs in the same way that the Chinese government does. Far from it. We're a very different system. We have different ways of supporting industry. We need to find our own American style of innovation and to really use a lot of the tools that has made us the global leader in technology over the course of the last several decades. And so I'm optimistic that we'll be carrying that message and that policymakers will understand that. We're trying to make sure that we're educating however possible so that people have situational awareness for what other countries are doing. But that's been a big focus lately.
Yeah. Kind of how close are we to level 5 cars, and kind of what's it going to take to get there?
It's the sort of thing where I think a lot of people are so focused on making the level 4 experience a even better one and a safer one. I think that's where a lot of the energy is. I think in terms of level 5, this is something where you're talking about go anywhere, go anytime. And, I don't have a strong sense from a technological perspective when or whether we will ultimately get there. If you think about level 4, these can be very large geographic areas that could take over, be suburban areas and city areas. It could be, very big interstates. It could be, very large communities. And so we can reach many millions of Americans via level 4 technology. And so that's really where we're focused at this time.
So I guess it's interesting. So to implement level 4, you have to map the roads, 1, and then 2, deploy the vehicles. Is that right?
Yeah, so mapping is always the first step. That's something where they need to make sure that they're going in and very intricately finding all of the routes that it might go. And this is not something where you can use off the shelf mapping. It's not going to be Apple or Google Maps or Waze or anything like this. This is very expensive proprietary technology that goes in to mapping it. And what they're ultimately trying to get to is what the companies would refer to as their operational design domain, and this is the kind of geofenced area that they will ultimately be in. And so that's always the first step. And then you see the testing that goes on. But what's interesting is even after you've done all the mapping and you've got a sense of what the atmosphere is going to be, there are still all these interesting corner cases out there where the technology is going to be challenged. And I'm always amused and impressed by a lot of the videos I've seen of a lot of our members where you see a situation where a vehicle is going down the road in a place like San Francisco. A human comes popping out behind a car out of the street for totally inexplicable reasons. The autonomous vehicle is able to brake very, very hard to stop and not kill that individual. And I oftentimes think to myself, these are the kind of corner cases, the strange circumstances that nobody can really plan for. But these autonomous vehicle companies have designed such great technology that they're able to save lives in ways that you or I as a human could never hope to ultimately do that.
No, definitely. The future is going to be fascinating. It's coming here quicker and quicker. It's amazing. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. We definitely learned a lot. We look forward to seeing what you and your association's up to in the next coming years.
Thanks for having me as a guest. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks.